Hey everybody, this patch brought something super exciting for me, which was Sinister Gear. For a long time, I have been begging ANET that they change Rampager gear to have Condi damage or power main stat, so that condition damage builds would be at least comparable to direct damage builds in dungeon solos, and also not laughably bad in group play. Well, this patch, my prayers have been answered. Sinister Gear is Condi damage main stat, power and precision secondary, finally giving players a condition damage glass cannon set worth talking about. This opens up tons of possibilities in PvE for dungeon soloers, and maybe even organized groups can bring along a Condi player for some casual runs. With that said, I am happy to present you all with my updated condition damage warrior guide for PvE. Before I get into it, I would like to stress that this build is suboptimal in groups compared with the meta Berserker build, but it's not so terrible that you would feel terrible and bad using it every once in a while for fun or pugging with it, and it's definitely viable for dungeon soloing. So use the build responsibly and you'll definitely enjoy it. Alright, let's start with traits. For this build, we use a 2-6-0-2-4 trait spread, which will maximize our DPS potential when using a condition damage build. In strength, the first trait we're going to take is dual wielding. Previously, when we were using Rabid gear in the condition damage build, the 5% boost to the direct damage from dual wielding was fairly unimpressive, and it was kind of a throwaway trait that we just took really to get the 10% condition duration from strength. But in a Sinister build, where our direct damage is actually a meaningful contribution to our overall DPS, the dual wielding and the 100 power you're getting from strength is actually pretty good. So this suddenly went from being a throwaway trait to actually being an important part of the build. In arms, we will go the full 6 because there are some very nice traits at each level for us. At the Adept level, we're going to go with Deep Cuts. This will increase our bleed duration by exactly by 50%, which is an absolute gigantic boost to our overall DPS, since bleeds are a very large portion of what we do to inflict damage in this build. Condition duration, as an aside, is the most important thing you can do in PvE for a condition damage build. You want to get as close to the 100% condition duration cap as you can get, and that will up your DPS quite significantly in a condition damage build. So generally when you're making one, your thoughts should be how to get to the 100% cap. At the Master level, we take Blade Master, which increases our critical hit chance with a sword. Since we spend the vast majority of the time using this build on main hand sword, Blade Master is a huge boost for us, giving us an extra 10% critical chance. Anytime that you can get a single trait, especially at the Master level, that gives you the equivalent of over 200 precision, you're getting a pretty good deal from it. And at the Grandmaster level, we will take Dual Wield Agility. This is going to increase our auto attack speed with main hand sword by about 6 to 7% overall, which increases our direct damage output and our ability to inflict bleeds, since our auto attack does inflict bleeding. As an alternative, you could take Furious here. However, unlike in PvP, our goal is not to use our burst skills on cooldown, so Furious doesn't do as much for our overall DPS as Dual Wield Agility. And before we leave arms, I want to mention how Attack of Opportunity, additional 10% damage to bleeding foes. When we were using Rabid, this wasn't so great. 10% damage when your attacks were hitting for very little wasn't so awesome. But now that our direct damage hits for a decent amount, Attack of Opportunity really becomes a great trait for us. So Sinister Gear is really just buffing some of these traits that we were taking anyway and making them useful all around. Next we go to Tactics, where we take Inspiring Banners. Reducing the banner cooldown with this trait will give us 100% banner uptime, which is amazing on long solos. And even if you were in some group instances like Fractals, where some of the fights go on somewhat long and you'll have time to recast your banners, this trait's really good. When previous iteration of the build with Rabid gear, we ran this trait and we used Banner of Strength always. However, now that we are getting a decent amount of damage from our direct damage, Banner of Discipline becomes something that's awesome for the build as well. And the fact that you can get now twice the use out of Inspiring Banners makes the trait even better. Lastly, you do get 10% boon duration by going into Tactics. Since this build does have a very large might stacking element, the additional 10% boon duration is definitely a nice bonus for us. And then lastly, we go 4 into Discipline. Mostly, the best reason to go into Discipline is for fast hands, so that after we swap to Longbow and use our Longbow cooldowns, we're not stuck auto-attacking on Longbow. However, we do get a lot of mileage out of the Signet Mastery trait, since it will keep our Fury, Might, and Swiftness uptime, which are all very good in Dungeon Solos. The Master level trait can be pretty much anything. I like Warrior Sprint as a default. However, you can also use Mighty Defenses if you know you're in the type of fight where you're going to get many blocks, perhaps from projectile attacks in rapid succession that can stack you up to 25 Might rather easily. But generally speaking, Warrior Sprint is my default at this level. And additionally, we're getting 200 Ferocity for going into this, which was a throwaway in the Rabid build, but now that we're actually putting out some substantial direct damage, the 200 Ferocity is a pretty good deal. So that's it for traits, guys. We're going to move on to gear next. The gear, as you might have guessed, is pretty much heavily Sinister. There's only one Ascended level Sinister trinket, an earring, that's available currently that you get for completing the optional objectives in the Living Story. I have not got mine yet, but I am working on it. I encourage everyone to get them as quickly as they become available. But for now, we're stuck with craftable exotics. For the back piece, there's currently no Sinister back piece, and based on the amount of chapters they have left and the amount of trinkets I have to go through, I don't believe there's going to be a back piece for Sinister for the time being. If you are making this build from scratch, I would suggest getting Celestial. It's the best bet for a build like this until Sinister options are available. If you already have a Rabid backpack from running this build before, you can just stick with the Rabid, and that's perfectly fine. And if you have neither, and you don't want to waste the gold crafting a Celestial backpack, by all means just use Berserker, and that'll tide you over until a Sinister option's available. For our armor, we're using Sinister gear with Aristocracy runes. These runes are available from Caudicus Manor Dungeon or the Caudicus Manor PvP reward track. Simply put, most condition damage professions, these are the best runes available since they have condition damage and might duration. Might, importantly, increasing your condition damage, and in this build also increasing your direct damage. So this rune is basically a straight DPS condition damage rune. With these runes, it's not uncommon for this build to maintain well over 20 stacks of might in solo, which is a huge DPS boost since it buffs both the power and condition damage, as I said. With our weapons, we use Sword, Longbow. For stats, we actually will take Givers and not Sinister. Givers weapons come with a 10% condition duration boost per hand, so 20% per set, which is an enormous boost for the overall DPS of a condition damage build. With the traits and the food that we use, we're going to hit 100% bleed duration cap. So Giver's weapons won't increase our bleed damage by too much, but they vastly increase our torment uptime from our impale, as well as the burning uptime that we get with our longbow. Since the goal of this build is to only swap to longbow when our burning is about to expire so that we can reapply the burning, the longer we can keep the burning up based on condition duration, the fewer times we have to swap to longbow. The fewer times we have to swap to longbow, the more time we can spend attacking with sword. The more time you can spend attacking with sword, the more bleeds you're going to do. So even though we're hitting the bleed duration cap well before the Giver's weapons come into effect, the benefit of being able to stay on sword and not have to go to longbow very often, or as often, means that the Giver's weapons are giving us a DPS increase even though they're not really increasing our bleed duration in a roundabout way. For sigils, I will use Sigil of Strength on my main hand sword for might stacking. This will be obviously key to getting us, in conjunction with the Aristocracy runes, very high on might. And on the offhand sword, Sigil of Bursting 6% to condition damage. This is obviously really good. Just basically a straight 6% condition damage upgrade, which will help us quite a bit. And then on the longbow, I use Sigil of Corruption and Sigil of Energy. I think Corruption's really good to have, especially when you're soloing. Sigil of Energy, however, is optional. I like Energy because I will tend to solo difficult bosses with this build, and you definitely want Energy for those type of bosses. However, if you don't need Energy, feel free to use Sigil of Geomancy or Sigil of Battle. Either one of those will be a substantial DPS boost. If you are a complete baller, which I'm not, you could have two Giver's Longbows and have one with Corruption and Energy and another one for Corruption and Geomancy, which would be nice for you. But feel free to knock yourself out on that. And next we'll go over the utility skills since we've covered. So for utilities, the default skills are going to be Signet of Fury, Banner of Strength, and Banner of Discipline. For challenging boss fights where you need extra dodges, feel free to swap out the Signet of Fury for Signet of Stamina. In situations where you don't need to bring both banners, like say you have another warrior in the group, feel free to bring For Great Justice instead of Banner of Discipline. But overall, since you have the banner cooldown trait, using both banners is going to be better DPS for you in the long run than having For Great Justice on your bar as a default. When you're doing open world stuff, banners are quite annoying. You don't want to have to carry them with you all around. So when I do open world, this will be my setup. I'll go double Signet and For Great Justice, and that makes it somewhat easier to get around in open world without having to think about things. But generally, like I said, this is the default. And if you're doing fractals or something like that, feel free to swap to Battle Standard, especially since we have the banner cooldown trait. It will make Battle Standard quite awesome. As far as playstyle goes, the build is very straightforward. Your goal is to auto-attack on sword as much as possible. This will maximize your bleeds as well as your might stacks. The other thing you want to micromanage is your torment uptime. You want to impale as soon as it comes off cooldown to maximize your torment. Once your target hits 50%, you're going to want to Final Thrust on cooldown. Even in a condition damage build, thanks to Sinister Gear, Final Thrust hits definitely hard enough to make it worth doing whenever it's available off cooldown as soon as the boss hits 50%. So then the question is, when do you switch to Longbow? I touched on this earlier, but generally the goal with the build is to keep burning at 100% uptime. So once you see that the burning condition that you inflicted on the boss is about to expire in a second or two, then you swap to Longbow. You're going to pin down first, then Fan of Fire, Combustive Shot, Arcing Arrow into it, and then swap back to Sword and go back to work with the Sword auto. This will, with the Combustive Shot at max Adrenaline, and the Fan of Fire, it will put a significant amount of burning on the boss. And by the time that you're forced to swap back to Longbow again, you'll be back at full Adrenaline, and pin down will be off cooldown. One thing to be aware of when microing is generally speaking, the rule of thumb is you want to drop your banners immediately when they're back off cooldown. However, if you know that in a few seconds you're going to be switching to Combustive Shot to drop the fire field, you're probably better off waiting a few seconds on the banners till your fire field is down, and then dropping the fire field and the banners into the fire field for the extra might stacks. In this build, we have so much might duration that our blasted fire fields, the might will last 31 seconds. That's a pretty big DPS increase if you can get all those blasts in the fire field. So for consumables, the food that we're going to use is Koi Cakes. Koi Cakes will bring us to 100% condition duration for bleeds and 70% duration for the other conditions in our build. So these are just a huge overall DPS increase, and they give us 70 extra condition damage. Another alternative is the Sweet and Spicy Beans from Dry Top. However, in this build, they do not do as good a DPS as Koi Cakes. So Koi Cakes being the fact that you can get 25 Koi Cakes for the price of one Sweet and Spicy Bean makes Koi Cakes the clear winner here. For the utility nourishment, I recommend Toxic Focusing Crystal. This is going to give us another 10% condition duration, which will give us more bleeding, more torment, and it also gives us 100 condition damage. This is the final piece of the puzzle for maximizing our DPS and putting out extremely high damage. When you're doing casual stuff and you're on a budget, you can just get these artisan tuning crystals. They don't add a ton of condition damage, but it's better than nothing, and that's basically the budget option. So that is the build, guys. I hope you enjoy this build a lot, and if you have any questions about it or have any stories to tell for using it for yourself, please feel free to hit me up in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much, guys, and talk to you soon.